So let's talk a little bit more about how the coming back on stream of the US in terms of exporting and selling their own oil could cause a major hiccup for exporting countries like Nigeria. Let's talk to Jibrin Karim. He's an energy research analyst with EcoBank. Good morning to you, Jibril. Thank you so much for coming through.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So it's something I know that has made you to, really go back and wonder if this should be anything to bother the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. The coming back of U.S. into the market, lifting its 40-year ban on oil exports. Should it be worrisome for OPEC producers?
Well, I think the way we have to look at it is what are the factors that are motivating the U.S. exports, and the factors are quite straightforward. Okay, U.S. production has increased from the 5-year period of 2009 to 2014 from about 5 million barrels to about 8 million barrels, and this year is already up to 9.3 million barrels. So, and the bulk of that increase is in shale oil. And refining shale oil means that a lot of refineries will have to make some adjustments into their equipment to refine shale oil as against conventional oil. Okay, so most of those refineries, some of them have looked at the cost to benefit, and they are now willing to adjust to take on the shale oil. We rather continue to import conventional crude oil, and that was the motivation behind the U.S. deciding to lift ban on exports. Okay, so how we can look at it is how is that going to affect the traditional market for OPEC countries? I don't really think it's going to have so much of effect, because most of these regions are actually have refineries that are that traditionally refined conventional crude oil as against shale. So what would motivate any of those refineries to switch to shale oil? We'll be looking at the benefits, the cost benefits if you are actually switching to shale. Yes, shale oil will traditionally WTI benchmark trade at a discount to the Brent, but if the cost of adjusting your equipment to refine shale is going to take that, if going to wipe out that discount, there will be no reason to switch to shale oil. So yes, the US will be coming to the market, but even the volume that they will be introducing to the market will not be so much significant, or will it have any impact on traditional OPEC importing countries.
Now, sanctions will be lifted off Iran in the early part of 2016, and Iran, once the second biggest producer in OPEC, plans to boost supply by 500,000 barrels per day. So would you say Iran might most likely be a problem for some of the other producers?
I think yes, you're right on point. Iran is much more of a bigger problem for OPEC than U.S. crude exports, because if you look at for instance, where Nigerian crude are heading now, which is markets in Asia, for instance, in India. India used to be one of the largest partner in crude trading with Iran. And if U.S. decide to lift the ban on Iran by the first quarter of 2016, we'll see we'll see refineries in India turning back into importing from Iran as against coming far away to Nigeria. And that's a major concern for crude exporters in Africa, most importantly Nigeria and Angola. And another is that, for instance, South Africa used to be another major crude trade partner with Iran. And some of crudes from this region has also been heading in that direction as well. So I think the impact that Iran will have in being introduced to this market is much more significant than what we're expecting about U.S. lifting ban on crude exports.
Which means going into 2016 and having a crude benchmark at $38 per barrel and production at 2.2 million barrels is not something to worry about.
Well, it is something to worry about, because there is just no information in the market now that could sustain a rally in the price of oil. First of all, we have increase in production, and if we look on the demand side, demand is projection is also weak, because if we look at what usually drive demand is a growing economy, and if we look at traditional economies that are heavily dependent on energy. Look at China, for instance. Projection for China growth in 2016 is even lower than it is in 2015. So on the demand side, it's not looking good, and on the supply side, there is a projection of increase in supply. So what will happen is that we would most likely see additional glut in the supply side of the market, and that will put more pressure on price. So to say that there's nothing to worry about would be being too optimistic. Of course, these factors are there, and point of concern for petroleum exporting countries.
So in your opinion, where would you say the production level, the crude production level for 2016 should be benchmarked at? Should it be left at a 2.2 or come down to maybe 2.1 or go higher?
Well, in history is to go by, Nigerian crude oil production benchmark has always, crude oil actual production has always fallen short of the benchmark. So I'm not surprised that the government has picked another supposedly unachievable benchmark again this year. That has always been what was sustainable in the past year. But what will actually mean is that whether you shift the benchmark or not, the actual fact of what will happen in 2016 is not going to have an effect on projection. What you should actually be looking at is how to fill the gap between your budget projection and the government income, which are expected to be lower in 2016.
Well, thank you so much, Jibril. But just before I let you go, just to get your thoughts, right now Brent crude is down about 19 cents to $36.87 per barrel. Do you think that this is going to continue for the rest of today and probably into the start of next week? Well, what do you think could happen to the markets? Because a lot of people had actually thought that the U.S. Fed decision could sort of shade commodities market, but we didn't see that happening much. What do you think could happen right now that might give the market some kind of breather?
Okay, two factors have been affecting commodity prices in recent time. One is the U.S. Fed decision. The other is data coming out of the United States. As against expectation, U.S. about 2 days ago released its crude inventory data, which that inventory again increased. And the inventory again is increased in the U.S. So that brought about another pressure on crude oil prices. And so the end of the year, I don't think there is so much expectation on the data front to provide any breather for the price of crude price. So I think that prices are going to stay at the current level till the end of the year. And projection are a bit much optimistic for 2016. If we look at it on average, we have houses projecting about $45 per barrel for 2016. Then much more optimistic in 2017 when we are seeing an average projection about $65 per barrel. So that for the rest of this year, I don't see any significant rally in oil price.
Jibril, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning on the program, and do have a great weekend.